Thanks so much for giving me some time to chat with you all this afternoon. I'm here to talk about Help Cities Lead, which was a BC-based, it's sort of a case study on advancing decarbonization policies for buildings in cities. A little bit about me. While I live in Victoria right now, I'm sort of first and foremost a Winnipegger. Over 30 years of my life have been spent in Winnipeg, and it'll always be my home. So I'm really happy to be here talking with you guys today. I have a master's in urban planning from the University of Manitoba, and I've really focused the last 10 years of my career on climate policy, working for the cities of Edmonton and Victoria. And I now work for a nonprofit called the Community Energy Association, which works with BC local governments on advancing climate action in cities. So my specialization is really in those policy solutions that reduce emissions in the built environment with a focus on buildings and land use. So a little bit about the Help Cities Lead group. This educational and awareness campaign is really focused on trying to build a better relationship between cities and the province of BC to advance building climate policy. The group was led by Climate Caucus, which is a national network of elected officials at the local level, so mayors and councillors that are really concerned and interested in leading on climate. But it's also supported by local governments. I'll talk a little bit more about that later on, and various environmental NGOs here in the province. So this is sort of our problem statement that BC communities are keen to slash climate pollution from buildings, but they'll need a little help from the province in order to get there. So if we're looking at the challenge, this has been a tremendously difficult year for communities in BC with things like flooding and the heat dome. And so cities are finding themselves really very much on the front lines of climate change and trying to figure out how they can rapidly reduce emissions from buildings. And a lot of the communities here feel like they're already using all of the tools that they have at their disposal to reduce emissions in buildings. And that there still really is such a huge opportunity, depending on what community you're in BC, the emissions from buildings can account from anywhere to from 40 to about 60% of a community's overall emissions. But the challenge really is that many of the best policy tools that could be used to actually decarbonize buildings remain a little bit beyond the reach of some of these communities. Local governments are the most subordinate level of government, and they really don't have all of the different levers that the higher levels, the provincial and federal government, have. This graph on the slide here is from the organization that I work for, and we use this just to demonstrate, some of the things that that local governments actually have control over when it comes to reducing emissions. But I just wanted to point out in this context too, we have building efficiency standards sort of located in the middle there. This is a BC specific context, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. If we were to make the same chart for Manitoba, you'd be moving this over into the low category. So I'm going to talk about the 5 key policy tools that Help Cities Lead really were advocating to the province, to be able to use to decarbonize buildings. And I've included just an assessment to the best of my knowledge of where some of these things also exist in the Manitoba context, just to give you guys a little bit of a lay of the land. So the first one I'm going to talk about is building energy benchmarking. So, this is a policy that would require building owners of, all different types of buildings to annually measure, report, and or disclose their property's energy use and GHG emissions. Why is it needed? To really effectively reduce climate pollution, cities need to ensure that the different programs and policies, the incentives, but also any regulatory work that they're doing will actually work to decarbonize different building sectors. And to do this, they really need access to data And right now, we just don't have that data to make those decisions. So there is a voluntary building energy benchmarking program in BC. It's called Building Benchmark BC that has about 14 communities that participate in it right now. But what we're asking for specifically here is the ability for local governments to actually have a requirement that it's mandatory to do benchmarking. And so, the current state in Manitoba, the city of Winnipeg currently has a voluntary building energy benchmarking program. And I haven't spoken with them as to whether or not they're looking to make that into a mandatory program in the future or not. So the next one is similar, but for more oriented at single detached homes. So actually requiring home energy labels. So again, getting builders to disclose the energy efficiency and performance of new homes via an energy score. Often EnerGuide is used to do this. Often it can be affixed to the home's electrical panel, and the sticker would provide homeowners and others with some of that basic energy performance information and help them make better decisions. In the US, we've even started, and in the UK, sometimes the information is actually included in MLS listings as well, too. So again, why is it needed? Without a detailed picture of the energy performance of homes, residents really can't accurately estimate the cost of ownership or any needed efficiency improvements. And again, that access to information for local governments that would really help design retrofit incentive programs. But also that the federal and provincial governments require any energy labels to help inform consumers, if you're looking for a fridge. But yet there's nothing for the biggest purchase that you would potentially make. I'm not aware of any movement on mandatory or voluntary programs in the Manitoba context, but the federal government has been saying, like I think it was in the Pan-Canadian Framework on Clean Growth and Climate Change 6-ish years ago that came out, that there would be these programs across the country, and the province of BC has committed to actually launching a home energy labeling program for the province, but it has no timeline or budget associated with it, so we'll see. The next policy that we were advocating for is around something called property assessed clean energy financing. And so PACE allows a property owner to really get access to financing to reduce some of those upfront costs of paying for building retrofits. And what this does is it actually puts the financing is placed on the home, and it does not, because it is a voluntary property tax assessment, so it follows the home through the lifespan of the payback of the energy retrofit measure. So if the home gets sold, that loan would go to the next owner and wouldn't stay because it stays with the home. Again, upfront costs are always a serious barrier to retrofits, and property owners often lack that access to capital, and the long payback periods for financing don't exist sometimes in the private market. So, PACE programs often kind of close that gap. But they can be fairly straightforward to run, and right now, there is a program from the Federation of Canadian Municipalities that is giving local governments dollars, not only to design these programs, but to also dollars to offer to residents for the actual financing. The current state in Manitoba is the same as in BC. Enabling legislation is needed from the province for local governments to actually be able to engage in PACE loans. And when I worked for the city of Edmonton, we worked really hard with the province to actually get this legislation drafted and passed. And so that is what's happening in BC right now. There's a lot of advocacy, and the province has said that they're going to make some sort of announcement. So I'd be happy to share that work with people here too, if you'd like to use it for some advocacy efforts. And so just about getting to the end of the policy solutions, talking about regulating climate pollution in existing buildings. And so again, this would allow local governments to limit emissions from existing buildings. Again, we talked about, 40 to 60% of community greenhouse gas emissions are from buildings. So we're seeing that, just incentive and information programs are not enough to actually catalyze the amount of retrofits that need to happen at scale to meet climate targets. And as most major building retrofits only take place, every 15 to 20 years, that there's a need to sort of accelerate the pace of that too. So there are many cities that already regulate minimum carbon performance requirements for existing buildings, including the city of Vancouver will be introducing this in the next couple of years. New York does, and Tokyo does as well. And just a point, Vancouver is able to do this because it has special charter powers that the rest of BC local governments don't have. Winnipeg also has charter powers, but I don't actually really understand what they entail, to be honest. So something to look into a little bit more. And there are kind of, different ways of achieving this. It could be through like an alterations code for existing buildings, or these building performance standards that actually say, X type of building has to reduce emissions by this percentage, and they sort of scale down over time. Yeah, I'm not aware of anything that's happening to date in Manitoba, but there is, the province, I'm sure, is involved in the consultations on the creation of a national model alterations code that isn't supposed to come into effect until 2030, though. So that's a long ways out. So the last one is about, again, regulating climate pollution for new buildings and new construction. So what we were asking for is that local governments have the ability to actually limit the amount of greenhouse gas emissions from newly constructed buildings. And the why this is really important in the BC context, about 1/3 of the buildings that will be standing in 2050 will be built over the next 30 years. So if they're not constructed to low or zero emission standards, they just become part of that overall retrofit burden in the future, which will be really challenging. The one thing that I wanted to point out here is this is where BC has a very unique power at the local government level. The BC Energy Step Code is an energy efficiency code that was created by the provincial government, where they allow local governments to actually accelerate the different steps of the BC Energy Step Code ahead of the provincial backstop. The challenge here is that the BC Energy Step Code is an energy efficiency code, and it's not specifically aimed at carbon reductions. So, the context to Manitoba here would be that the National Model Code is looking at it modeling itself after the BC Energy Step Code. And so in Manitoba, where you have actually the cleanest grid, I believe, in the whole country, you would result in similar emissions from this graph that you can see on the right-hand side here, where a single detached home could still meet step 5 of the BC Energy Step Code and be connected to natural gas and have considerably more emissions than if it reached step 5 and was heated electrically. So just pointing that out, that if the National Model Code is modeled on the BC Energy Step Code, then the whole country is going to have this similar challenge. Also, the City of Winnipeg does have a council motion on getting buildings off natural gas. I haven't seen anything to date that actually looks at the policy mechanism that would be used to do that, but hopefully there'll be more information on that in the future. So I'm going to go really quickly through this part. That's just talking about how we actually built up our case and did our advocacy to the province. So the first thing we did was actually create a website and some briefing notes. Those briefing notes were meant to cover these topics, like what is this policy? Why is it needed? We actually did things like GHG modeling for all of the policies to show what the potential impact could be if they were implemented province-wide. We called up other places and did interviews. We looked at other research. but we also clearly indicated to the provincial government what our assessment of the current situation was. Then we set out actually getting endorsements from local governments. So we focused on full city councils instead of just one elected official. We actually created a model council resolution that people could bring forward to endorse the campaign. And we used local government staff as a conduit to kind of get these motions to their councils. And then we were asking them, does this align with your local climate plan or your climate emergency declaration? And in many cases, we actually saw a lot of these policy initiatives were actually already identified in climate plans that cities had. We also got endorsements from different NGOs. In particular, Pembina Institute is part of the steering committee for Help Cities Lead, and they brought a lot of legitimacy to their project, but also really good connections with the provincial government. So we went and met with ministers. We really decided to focus on that political decision-making level because some of these initiatives can be politically contentious. Like staff at the provincial government don't have, necessarily the authority to move these things forward. And our meetings with ministers, we had councillors, we had the NGO reps and municipal staff there to talk with them. So sort of wide representation. So my advice to you is if you were to do something similar, would again really focus on that political or as high up as the executive leadership or decision-making level that you can get to. Even meet with your opposition, clearly outline the changes you want to see and start to model those impacts. Create some really easy to read briefings. We actually chose the briefing note format as that's what ministers get from provincial government staff. So we just followed the format, kept it in a thing that they're used to. But also that creating a website and an actual brand and a name for this actually really helped to legitimize the work. I guess the last point would just be about considering your audience, how to really think about how this aligns with their goals. We, have all these statements about how this work helps the province meet their climate goals as well. And yeah, again, how it's basically how can you help them meet their targets too? And think about how they like to receive information and provide really clear and understandable language. Even the language I've used in this presentation is not the language I would normally use to talk about these things, but we had a communications consultant who made us take the jargon away, which was really, really good. But also, yeah, just build that broad-based coalition, get endorsements from things like municipal councillors or even just a councillor or a mayor, other civil society actors like those NGOs. And even, unions and different industry advocates. At the time of Help Cities Lead, the union in BC hadn't started working on this quite yet, but now they're really engaged in the retrofit space. And so they're a new kind of partner for us to work with. Yeah, and just there's some info there if you want to get in touch.
Thank you so much, Robyn. That was really interesting. So we're just going to pop right over to Cindy. And we're going to have Cindy start.
Okay.
Right.
I guess if you could bring up that slide deck that I sent over to you.
Bravo.
I'll be super quick about this. Okay, so actually, thank you, Robyn. It worked really well both ways. Your presentation kind of gives us a list of things to do, which is really a good stimulus for what we're going to do with my presentation. So our question here on this part is green building advocacy in Manitoba. Are we going in the right direction? Next slide. We got feedback last year when we did a member survey, and the number one advocacy piece that they wanted us to do was to get stronger with our advocacy. And this is just quickly to go over our vision. What are we advocating for? It's a vision of a sustainable built environment in Manitoba. Next slide. So this is on our website. Again, just a quick review. We've done some of the things that Robyn's suggesting. So we're not all the way there, but I think we've got a base. So the objectives that SBM has, in short form, building code adoption, so parallel with the STEP code and the national code development, getting the workforce ready for a new deep green built environment, looking at our materials and environment, and trying to focus on how we can make the materials that we use for green buildings more sustainable. Also, to your point, Robyn, again, getting off natural gas, no new expansion, and reducing that consumption. That starts to speak to our GHG goals. And also looking at finance, that's always a big part of it. How do we improve our buildings, especially the existing ones? And we have to look at investments now and the total cost of ownership over the life of building to make the case and a real understanding of what we're investing in when we're doing buildings in general, never mind green buildings. Next slide. I also want to point out that in our objectives, we have we say that we want to strive for net zero. And the reason why I bring that up is because of what we're going to hopefully engage with you all over on the next few weeks on how we're going to move forward. Next slide. So as well, SBM is doing, has identified 3 main activities on our strategy: education, advocacy, and promotion. Next slide. We're talking about advocacy today, and the kind of things that we've done so far over this last year, since we got that priority to focus on advocacy, is we've engaged with the public and elected officials. We've started with op-eds. You may have seen them over the last year, primarily with the Free Press. We participate in reports and research to get the issue out there. Road to Resilience, for example, and the alternative municipal budget. We've been engaged in trying to feed building issues in. Public consultation. So we're taking part in Manitoba's energy framework, in the community energy investment work that's going on in the city of Winnipeg. And we're also starting to be invited to participate on advisory boards for Efficiency Manitoba and participating with Efficiency Canada. So that's another advocacy role we do. You probably have also noticed we did actually spearhead some campaigns this year to promote green schools and to promote a stronger sustainability presence with the city of Winnipeg. And then also, we don't have to front everything. We also have been advocating and supporting complementary initiatives that help us to promote green buildings with partners and collaborators as well. Next slide. So primarily what we wanted to do today is to introduce what we're trying to pull together, which we're calling the SBM Policy Placemat. This is an invitation for all of you online here to work with us and feed back to us on clarifying what we're doing next. We see that there is an opportunity with the approaching municipal and provincial elections, and we wanted to be ready for that and to have a clear paper so that we can go to candidates and voters in the next 18 to 24 months. So this is the invitation. What you see here on this slide is a draft of what we want to do to approach the province and municipalities on our objectives. This will be made available to you through the chat, I believe, Laura, for you to review, look at what we're proposing for actions that we're going to endorse with the province and municipalities. And we want to hear back from you on what to prioritize, if we're on the right track. If you have any supporting examples, for example, that Robyn gave us from BC with the STEP code, if we're promoting, say, for example, adopting a STEP code or the national code here in Manitoba, we want to be sure that we can tell decision makers that it's not rocket science, it's being done elsewhere. We also want to get your input over the next few weeks, both today and following this presentation, and at our policy party next week, so that we can gather the wisdom of all our members and pull it together for a placemat to be presented at our annual general meeting in a few weeks. And that could be the launch point for us to start advocating to the rest of the municipalities and province, and indeed to start engaging memberships and members and sponsors and partners in this message, so that we can get a consistent elevator pitch, if you will, to the people out there who need to be advised on what's going on with green buildings. New slide. So that's my short pitch to you. This is what we've been starting to do at Sustainable Buildings Manitoba. We want our members to get involved with our advocacy as well. So first thing is to take a look at our list of things to do and our placemat development. Tell us what you think needs to be added, or if we can do something more in that placemat. Please join us next Thursday, a week from now, at the policy party at the, where are we having that? Downtown at True North Center.
Well, we're going to start at 1:30 in the Gathertown space. And then for those people who are here in Winnipeg at 3:30, we'll be gathering in person, because relationships are such an important part of advocacy as well.
Yeah, and we'll have the options to meet outside too at that location. So if anyone's shy about gathering, again, me included, but I'm really looking forward to seeing you all and hearing what you have to say. And then also, if you can't make that, just to put it on your list of things to do in the future, keep tabs on what we're doing, watch for our placemat, and try to engage your network as well, and have this discussion, because I think this is important. We as an industry can move this forward if we all speak on the same message. Okay, I think that's it.
All right, thank you. All right, so we're going to open it up to questions now, so you can raise your hand, drop them in the chat. In Manitoba, who or what are the primary opponents to the policy/measures/changes SBM is advocating for? Is it purely political, or are there other less obvious people and organizations resisting?
I think the biggest barrier is the status quo. There's an awareness of buildings, but changing how we do things now is a bit of an unknown and may have costs associated. So I think that is part of the resistance that we might see. And that's why I think it's also important for us to have a clear message and get other people engaged, use our own networks and start talking about it. I see others at this point. I'd also like to invite others who have observations to pipe in as well on these questions.
Okay, so while people are waiting for their courage to pipe in there, we're going to turn it over to Mike with a question. Mike, take it away.
Thanks. Do you agree or disagree that it's more effective to go to a governing party directly rather than opposition and legislators? I guess you sort of touched on that with your comment that you like to go straight to ministers, but so what do you think is do you think that it can be worthwhile to go to the government and to the opposition at the provincial level?
Yeah, I would never recommend just going to the opposition without also talking to the governing party. It's just going to both of them, because 4-year terms aren't that long too, and so if you're making the opposition aware of some of the policy changes that you'd like to see in the future, you might see them actually show up in a party platform at a later point in time. But also that there's no harm in having an opposition MLA, stand up in the legislature and speak to the importance of some of this work. I think too, if you're not getting much traction with the governing party, to just, exhausting all possible channels, I suppose.
Yeah, and just jumping in there, sorry, Cindy, if I stepped on you. SBM believes in the importance of nonpartisanship. We just think it's really important to not just talk to the governing party or the opposition, but also the other parties, because anybody and everyone needs to be a champion on climate change. And a lot of people just don't know, and you can't blame people for what they don't know. And so it's really on these folks who are subject matter experts to help pass on that information and inspire people, because buildings are the low-hanging fruit of climate action. Kurt, I see your hand. Oh, sorry, Cindy, did you want to add anything before I pass off to Kurt for a question?
Well, mostly a question for Robyn, same question that Corey asked earlier. What her observations have been in terms of resistance for green building policies.
I feel like most of it just falls to capacity in many cases. Like, do levels of government actually have the staff with the right skill set and understanding to actually start thinking about building out and implementing these policies? But do they also then have the necessary dollars to support trades, training, and all of the other various things that help like the successful implementation of them? That being said, the BC Energy Step Code came into being in the first place because local governments were saying, we are ready to act on this, and we're going to try creative pathways to doing this if the province doesn't act on it too. And the province eventually said, okay, we will act on this. And then they allocated a lot of money to help make it successful as well too. So yeah, it's if they're not hearing, if MLAs aren't hearing anything from their constituents about why this is important too, how are they ever going to push for it at a party policy convention or things like that as well too? So got to talk with them.
Great answers here. Kurt, did you still have a question or?
Well, I don't have a question, but Cindy invited me to, or people to chime in if with their own personal experiences on this thing, and well, like as you know, I've been in conversation with people at all levels of government, mostly provincial and municipal, but the feeling I get is, as you were saying, Cindy, that the challenge is the status quo, right? And there really no one is treating this as an emergency, and they're not treating it as an emergency, so they don't see that, and necessarily it's not my mandate, to take a leadership role in this. And then sort of associated with that is capacity. Like, especially we've had a campaign at SBM to try to increase the capacity of the sustainability office at the city of Winnipeg, because when we do advocate for changes like we're talking about, it's within the workings of the municipality. It's kind of like, well, who's supposed to do this? We don't have the capacity here. Maybe this other department will do it, and they don't have the capacity. And so they try to, there's a hot potato that they don't really, isn't that hot, so doesn't have the emergency aspect to it. And then it's unclear who's supposed to deal with it.
Well, and they don't even have the capacity to dig into, I showed one example in my presentation of funds available from a different level of government to help cities specifically advance some of this stuff around property assessed clean energy. But yeah, they don't even have a person to help take advantage of the existing funds in many cases too. So how do you, just get those base level resources in place so they can take advantage of a lot of the opportunities that exist in terms of funding? Because there is actually a fair bit.
And just before I let Sylvie with her question, I put another link into the chat to the Road to Resilience energy solutions that I presented in this forum for the last couple of weeks. And within it, there are programs necessary, like the deep energy retrofit. I think, Cindy, you mentioned it, that is really very disruptive and is going to require a lot of administration to manage it, and there's no entity that sees that as their mandate. There's something that they need to do. To, like, we're talking about World War II kind of level of action in order to improve the efficiency of virtually every building in the province, connect it to geothermal district heating systems, and mount solar panels on every rooftop that has that it makes sense to do so. So we don't have an entity that's accepting that challenge. So that's where I'm going to stop. And Sylvie, I see you got your hand up. I'm going to shut up.
No problem. Okay, so nice to see you, Robyn, there. So I guess my question is, for federal government, like, is there anything that citizens can do is there any like programs or policies that the federal government's doing, and especially that like the Liberals and NDP wants to work together? And I have one thing that I know that might help too, that I can comment after, but anything that you can think of?
Well, Efficiency Canada, one of the national advocacy organizations, had been doing lots of work to advocate for low-income energy efficiency programs. And yesterday, with the Liberals and the NDP signed like a supply agreement, or like formed a coalition, basically. They actually made an announcement on how they're going to advance low income and market rental energy retrofit programs, which is awesome. So it's also sort of taking the work, the good work of some of those organizations, and making sure that the MPs in your province are actually aware of them too, because they've already like built out the argument and everything. All you have to do is like try to get in some time with your MP to talk about why you think it's important.
Mm-hmm.
And the federal government is working on an implementation strategy for their climate plan that's supposed to be out by the end of the month, I think. So there'll be more, more info about what they actually plan to address versus where more advocacy is needed, I suppose.
Yeah, like the one, there's a bill, a private members bill, like NDP, with a climate infrastructure bank. They want to amend it. I heard about it not too long ago, and it's just something that I think they're voting on April 6th, Wednesday, April 6th. And I think, like, for me, it's like I've contacted my MP already, but like I feel like, you know, because that one, if they're gonna the NDP, or Nikki Ashton, she's the one who proposed it. She's saying to focus on climate change, adaptation, and mitigation for this Canada Infrastructure Bank instead of the private-public partnership. So I don't know if you were even familiar with that, but this was kind of news to me. I don't know.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of that, because I know like one of the issues with the Canada Infrastructure Bank is you have to have a nice like little packaged up offer of $25 million worth of building retrofits to get CIB funding in the first place. So a lot of people have been asking, well, how do we do that exactly? And yeah, so it's like the big financial sector and the big real estate investment trusts and, you know, all the Class A buildings, like they're going to be able to take advantage of it. But I don't know how the market rental, affordable housing, and that sector are going to be able to really take advantage of it. So I was glad to see that yesterday, the announcement of programs that are aimed more specifically at some other sectors too.
I think it's kind of interesting, though, when in considering what SBM needs to do to advocate for green buildings in Manitoba. We're a smallish population of about 1 million people in this province. So our industry and our political structure is not that big. So I'd like for you all to sort of think about how we can mobilize, given that we have, I think, a good sized community to try and address and to educate and to advocate among. Stuff like this, Sylvie, that we should be aware of. We only have a few MPs. Can we not address them all, right? So, coming forward and looking forward, what kinds of actions can we target to try and get some of these initiatives moving. I'd really like to hear from you all or the membership or your network.